At the family dinner, I raised my glass, ready to propose a toast, when I heard it, my father's voice, slicing through the convivial chatter like a honed blade. Nobody needs your money, or you, for that matter. The room didn't so much as ripple, it was as if he'd stated the weather. My sister, Sarah, even offered a small, knowing nod, almost amused, as if she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head for years, waiting for the opportune moment to unleash it. A wave of heat crawled up my neck, but I forced myself to remain composed. My smile a tight, polite mask. My silence a weapon sharper than any words they could hurl at me. They assumed I'd swallow it down, the way I always did, the way I'd been conditioned to. But as I sat there at that mahogany table, surrounded by people who seemed to value me only for what I could provide, I was struck by a chilling realization. Their downfall had already begun, quietly, subtly, beneath the surface of strained smiles and forced cheer. I grew up in that house, believing that silence was the immutable price of belonging, the unspoken tax levied on my presence. My parents never explicitly stated it, of course, but it resided in the pregnant pauses between their sentences, in the carefully calibrated silences that followed any expression of my own needs. Those tiny, sharp moments were my tuition, the lessons that taught me that my value was derived not from who I was, but from what I could give. Even as a child, I instinctively filled the gaps, eager to prove my worth. If Sarah forgot her homework, I was the one who raced to school, breathless and anxious, to deliver it. If Dad needed someone to stay home with Grandma, I canceled my own meticulously planned outings without a word of complaint. And when Sarah stumbled into adulthood and her bills began to mount like a relentless tide, somehow, inevitably, they all ended up in my lap, another burden willingly shouldered. They euphemistically called it being the reliable one, the responsible one, the rock of the family. But reliability morphs into servitude with frightening speed, when no one bothers to ask how you're doing, when your own well-being is deemed irrelevant. On the surface, my family presented a picture of warmth, of impenetrable unity, of boisterous camaraderie. Holiday photos showed us grinning in coordinated outfits, my mom's legendary sweet potato casserole reigning supreme in the center of the table like a hard-won trophy. Outsiders always remarked how lucky we were, but the kind of luck they saw was the superficial kind, the kind that photographs well, the kind you can frame and hang on a wall, not the deep-rooted, sustaining kind that keeps you safe from the storms of life. Grandma was the singular exception, the only person who ever looked at me and didn't see a resource to be exploited. I can still conjure her tiny kitchen, a haven of comforting aromas, peppermint tea steeping in a chipped mug, the comforting scent of old books whispering stories of forgotten worlds, the way her gnarled, time-worn hands would gently rest on mine when she quietly said, "You don't have to save the whole world, honey." Back then, I failed to grasp the profound truth embedded in her words, the understanding that she wasn't talking about global affairs, but about my world, my family, the very people who were slowly chipping away at my soul. After she passed, that kitchen became my sanctuary, my refuge from the relentless demands of my family. I kept the key hidden beneath a loose brick in the garden, a symbolic gesture of retaining a part of myself that was untouched by their expectations. I nurtured the memory of someone who truly saw me, not just what I could do. Back at the dinner table, the same table I'd spent countless hours setting, clearing, and cooking for, I found myself seated between people who had fundamentally rewritten me in their minds. I wasn't Maya, the dedicated project manager with a burgeoning career. I wasn't Maya, the independent woman who paid her own rent and meticulously built her own life. I was simply Maya, the one who fixes things, the one who always shows up, the one who covers the bill without a second thought, the one who never complains, the silent, ever-reliable cog in their machine. Dad didn't even bother to look up from his plate when he delivered his dismissive pronouncement. Mom simply continued meticulously slicing the honey-glazed ham, as if nothing of consequence had been uttered. Sarah smirked into her glass of Pinot Noir, savoring the moment. And somehow, in that instant, everything clicked into place with a chilling finality, like a heavy door slamming shut on a long and painful chapter. That house wasn't mine. Never had been. Never would be. Perhaps that's why their words, though laced with venom, didn't crush me the way they anticipated. It hurt, God, did it hurt? A deep gnawing ache in my very core. But it didn't break me. It clarified things, sharpened the edges of my resolve. It made the air around me feel cleaner, crisper. It illuminated the path forward, a path I hadn't been able to discern through the fog of obligation and guilt. I realized something in that moment that no one at that table had ever imagined possible. I didn't need them either. Not their conditional approval, not their manipulative guilt trips, not their suffocating rules, and certainly not the seat at the table they believed they had the right to take away. And for the first time in my life, the silence that had always been imposed upon me didn't feel like surrender, but like a powerful, liberating beginning. The dinner continued around me as if nothing cataclysmic had occurred. Plates scraped, glasses clinked in meaningless toasts. Someone laughed at a joke I didn't even register, but inside my head, everything went deathly still, as if the world had suddenly dropped into slow motion. I observed my family with the detached curiosity one might reserve for strangers on a train, wondering how I could have ever believed I belonged among them. Sarah leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine with a self-satisfied air, as if she'd just secured a major victory. "Mom's right," she added casually, her voice dripping with condescension. "You take things too seriously, Maya. No one needs all that you do." "Not really," she continued, as if offering a magnanimous act of kindness, as if she were somehow easing a burden off my weary shoulders. But what she truly meant, the unspoken subtext vibrating in the air, was, "You're only useful when we deem it so." I glanced at her, at my sister, whose overdue bills I'd repeatedly paid, whose children I'd outfitted with school clothes when she was between jobs, whose emergencies somehow always landed squarely in my lap, an endless cycle of obligation. She never seemed to remember the specifics, only the vague sense of convenience, the unwavering expectation that I would always be there to pick up the pieces. Mom finally looked up from the ham she was dissecting. "You work so much anyway," she said, her tone laced with a familiar blend of concern and veiled accusation. "It's not like you have a family of your own to worry about. We wouldn't want you burning yourself out for nothing." For nothing. That one stung more than I cared to admit, as if every hard-won hour I spent climbing the corporate ladder, every quiet effort to build a life for myself independent of their demands, was rendered worthless simply because it wasn't directly serving them. Dad didn't even glance my way when he muttered, "Let's not make this dramatic, Maya. It's just the truth. You always take things so personally." It was textbook gaslighting, cloaked in a veneer of polite concern, a tactic they had long since perfected. I surveyed the table, taking in the flickering candles, the meticulously arranged holiday centerpiece, the vacant chair where Grandma used to sit, her presence a palpable absence. I used to believe her absence left a simple ache, a nostalgic pang, but now it felt like a stark, unheeded warning, a beacon I should have recognized and responded to far sooner. Sarah dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter, clearly annoyed by my continued silence. "Come on, Maya," she said, her voice impatient. "Say something." But I didn't trust my voice, not because I was afraid of what they would think, but because anger, the quiet, precise, razor-sharp kind that was currently simmering within me, doesn't want to be spoken. It wants to be acted upon. I reached for my linen napkin, folded it neatly into a precise square, and placed it beside my plate, a simple, understated motion that nevertheless shifted something palpable in the room. Sarah noticed it first, her brow furrowing in confusion. Mom paused mid-slice, her knife hovering over the ham. I stood as calm as the surface of a frozen lake, my inner turmoil hidden beneath a facade of icy composure. "I hear you," I said softly, my voice clear and unwavering. Dad waved a dismissive hand. "Good," he said, his tone impatient. "Then we can move on." But the truth was, that was the precise moment I moved on, permanently, from the carefully constructed version of myself they had so meticulously built and maintained. The Maya who bent over backwards to please, who instinctively fixed every problem, who tirelessly carried the weight of their burdens. The Maya who gave without asking, who perpetually stayed small, so that others could remain comfortably oblivious. As I walked towards the hallway to retrieve my coat, I felt something deep within me settle into place, with a quiet, resolute thud. Not a crack, not a break, but a decisive shift in my internal landscape. They wanted me silent? Fine. Silence was exactly what they would get, but it wouldn't be the submissive, compliant silence they had come to expect. They had absolutely no idea what silence from me truly meant. I didn't slam the door as I departed. I didn't storm out in a theatrical display of anger or raise my voice in a futile attempt to be heard. I simply stepped out into the cold night air, letting the frigid breeze bite at my cheeks as if it could somehow prevent me from sinking too deeply into the abyss of hurt and resentment. The porch light flickered erratically behind me, And for a fleeting second, I caught my reflection in the window. A distorted image of tired eyes, tense shoulders, the familiar posture of someone who'd carried too much for far too long. The walk to my car felt longer than usual, each step a painful reckoning, each footfall peeling back another layer of accumulated memory. Every time I'd shown up with groceries to fill their empty pantries, every time Sarah forgot payday and I silently covered her overdraft fees, every emergency bill Mom had guilted me into covering with thinly veiled pleas of desperation, every moment Dad had praised my reliability only to later punish me with the crushing weight of their expectations. By the time I reached the driver's seat, a quiet tremor ran through my hands, a subtle vibration that resonated through my entire being. Not from fear, but from a profound sense of recognition. From the dawning clarity of finally seeing the situation for what it truly was. Back at my apartment, the silence resonated with an intensity that surpassed even the sting of their words. I switched on the hallway lamp, its soft, warm light spilling across my small, meticulously tidy living room, a space that had always felt like a brief pause between battles, a temporary respite from the demands of my family. But that night, it felt different, transformed into neutral territory, finally reclaimed as my own. I sat down at my dining table, pulled my laptop closer, and opened a folder I'd never dared to create before, a digital vault of long-suppressed truths. Family payments, the stark title declared, the words appearing foreign and clinical on the screen. A deliberate attempt to distance myself from the emotional weight of their contents. But the truth contained within that folder was anything but new. Bank statements, meticulously documented transfers, crumpled receipts I'd buried beneath layers of rationalizations. They needed help, I told myself, or, it's just this once, I'd repeatedly whispered, trying to quell the growing unease in my gut. I went through them slowly, methodically, like someone carefully sorting through the wreckage of a house after a devastating storm, searching for any salvageable pieces. Patterns began to emerge, with chilling clarity, repeated withdrawals, seemingly endless emergency charges. Late-night transfers accompanied by increasingly desperate pleas. The timeline formed itself before my eyes, a stark and undeniable indictment of their systematic exploitation. For years, I had convinced myself that speaking up would somehow make me cruel, that enforcing boundaries would be an act of unforgivable selfishness. But I now understood, with a painful jolt of clarity, that my silence had, in fact, made me disposable, a convenient source of endless funding with no inherent value beyond my financial contributions. The decision arrived gently, almost imperceptibly, the way dawn gradually touches a darkened room, chasing away the shadows and revealing the stark reality of its contents. There was no histrionic drama, no emotional breakdown, just a profound and irreversible shift in my internal compass. I drafted an email to a lawyer whose name Jen, a colleague from work, had casually mentioned months earlier. "If you ever get tired of being their safety net," she'd said with a knowing look, "call him, he's a shark." Back then I'd laughed it off, dismissing it as an absurd notion. Now it felt like the most natural, logical thing in the world. I attached everything to the email, every bank statement, every documented transfer, every pleading text message, every receipt meticulously scanned and filed. My cursor hovered over the send button, a moment pregnant with the weight of the unknown. I took a deep, steadying breath. Click! The file left my inbox, silently and irrevocably severing the ties that had bound me for so long. The reply from the lawyer arrived faster than I had anticipated, a testament to his efficiency and the gravity of the situation. "I've reviewed what you sent," he wrote, his tone professional and detached. "This isn't just family help, Maya, it's a demonstrable pattern of financial exploitation. If you're ready, we can move forward." "Ready?" The word hung in the air, a loaded question that demanded an honest and unwavering answer. I saw Dad's bored, dismissive face in my mind's eye. I heard Mom's voice dripping with condescension as she declared that no one needed my money or me. I saw Sarah smirking into her wine, secure in the knowledge that I would always be there to bail her out. I typed back a single, resolute sentence. "I'm ready." The days that followed were unlike any I had experienced before. I was no longer frantically patching holes in someone else's sinking boat. Instead, I was meticulously building a case, brick by painful brick. I met with the lawyer in a small, nondescript office downtown, far removed from the comforting familiarity of my carefully curated life. He listened patiently as I laid everything out, from the first seemingly innocuous borrowed payment to the devastating night they had declared that I wasn't needed. He asked pointed questions, demanding specific dates, precise amounts, exact phrases from their increasingly desperate texts. "Do you understand the ramifications of this?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "Once we file, this ceases to be a private family matter. It becomes a legal proceeding, a public record." "They stopped being just family the moment they began treating me like a walking ATM," I replied, my voice firm. "We documented everything," I explained, every late-night transfer, every tearful plea from Sarah begging for yet another emergency loan, every manipulative phone call from Mom attempting to guilt me into compliance, every instance Dad wrapped his demands in platitudes about familial duty and obligation. On paper, it was a stark and undeniable straight line of unauthorized withdrawals and emotionally coerced payments, a damning indictment of their calculated exploitation. When the fraud report was finally submitted, there was no dramatic thunderclap, no earth-shattering revelation. Just a simple confirmation email and a terse message from my lawyer. "They've opened an investigation. The wheels are in motion." Meanwhile, my family began to notice the subtle but unmistakable shift in my demeanor, the sudden cessation of financial support, the unwavering refusal to engage in their manipulative tactics. Sarah texted first, her tone a mixture of confusion and barely concealed annoyance. "You're acting weird, Maya. Is this about dinner?" Mom didn't mean it. I didn't respond, refusing to engage in her carefully crafted drama. Then Mom called, followed by Dad, their voicemails stacking up on my phone like unanswered prayers. "We're worried about you," they pleaded, their voices dripping with insincerity. "Don't take things so personally. Family talks things out, you know that." In one particularly desperate message, I could hear Sarah in the background, her voice shrill with panic as she complained that her credit card kept getting declined. I let the message play to the bitter end, then promptly deleted it, refusing to be drawn back into their vortex of need and entitlement. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called, his voice measured and professional. "They've opened an investigation," he confirmed. "There's enough evidence to move forward. They'll be speaking with you again. And with them." "Them," I repeated, the word hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "You've been carrying this alone for years," he said, his voice softening slightly. "It's theirs to carry now." The day it happened, the sky was a flat, unforgiving winter gray, mirroring the emotional landscape within me. My lawyer had advised me that I didn't have to be present when the investigators showed up at my parents' house. But I wanted to see it, to witness the precise moment they realized that I was no longer theirs to use. No longer a silent, ever-available resource to be exploited at will. From the street, my parents' house looked deceptively normal. The same festive wreath adorning the front door. The same familiar crack in the bottom step that Dad had been promising to fix for years. Through the dining room window, I could see the table meticulously set for dinner. My family gathered in their usual places, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I parked my car, walked up the familiar path, knocked once, sharply, and let myself in with the key I still possessed. A vestige of a past life I was determined to leave behind. Mom looked up, startled by my unexpected appearance. "Maya," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of surprise and thinly veiled annoyance. "You didn't say you were coming." I took off my coat, slowly and deliberately, taking in the carefully staged scene before me. Dad was seated at the head of the table, his posture radiating an air of paternal authority. Mom was at his right, her expression a carefully constructed mask of normalcy. Sarah was across from what used to be my chair, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Seth, her husband, leaned back in his chair, a picture of smug relaxation. "Thought you didn't need me," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Mom's eyes narrowed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Don't start, Maya," she warned, her tone sharp. Sarah rolled her eyes, dismissing my presence as a petty act of childish rebellion. "You're seriously still on that?" she said, her voice laced with condescension. I walked towards my old seat, but didn't sit. Instead, I set my bag down on the chair, a symbolic gesture of staking my claim, of refusing to be relegated to the sidelines any longer. Dad cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the rapidly escalating situation. "Look," he said, his voice strained with forced calmness. "About what was said last time, let's not blow it out of proportion. We were just talking, Maya." Mom bristled, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. "I was just being honest," she insisted, her voice defensive. "That's one word for it." I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. Seth snorted, his face contorted with disdain. We said we don't need your money, he sneered. Take the hint, Maya. Get a life. I looked from him to Sarah, my gaze unwavering. Funny, I said softly, my voice laced with irony. Some people seem to be very interested in where my money went. Sarah's forced laugh abruptly cut off, her eyes widening with a sudden realization. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded, her voice tinged with panic. Before I could answer, there was a sharp, authoritative knock at the front door. 3 hard, measured hits that rattled the frame and sent a chilling tremor through the room. The sound froze the room, silencing the petty bickering and exposing the raw, underlying tension. Dad frowned, his face a mask of confusion and growing unease. Who is that? He muttered. You should get that, Dad, I said, my voice calm and devoid of emotion. He pushed his chair back from the table and reluctantly went to the door, his footsteps heavy with apprehension. He opened it and stopped dead in his tracks, his face paling visibly. Good evening, sir, a man's voice said, his tone professional and unwavering. We're with the Financial Crimes Unit. We're looking for Sarah and Seth Miller, and Thomas and Elaine Carver. Silence descended over the house like a suffocating blanket, stifling the petty arguments and exposing the raw, underlying fear. Mom stood up abruptly, her face ashen. There has to be some mistake, she stammered, her voice trembling. 2 investigators stepped inside, their badges prominently displayed. One held a tablet, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced gaze. The other held a thick folder, its contents instantly recognizable from the copies my lawyer had shown me. There's no mistake, ma'am, the female investigator replied, her voice firm and devoid of emotion. We're here regarding an investigation into alleged financial fraud and exploitation. We'd like to ask you some questions. Sarah's chair screeched back as she jumped to her feet, her face contorted with rage and betrayal. Maya, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. What did you do? For the first time in a long time, I didn't shrink back, didn't cower beneath the weight of their anger and disappointment. I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. I stayed silent for far too long, I said, my voice calm and clear. Then, I started doing things you never expected. Seth stepped forward, his face red with fury. You called the cops on your own family over a few measly transfers? He sputtered, his voice incredulous. The male investigator looked at him, his expression unreadable. We're talking about years of unauthorized withdrawals and coerced payments, sir, he said, his voice icily polite. That's not a few measly transfers. Please sit down, sir. Dad tried to pull himself together, attempting to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. This is all a misunderstanding, he said, his voice strained. Any money that moved around was just family business. We take care of each other. Family business doesn't override the law, sir, the female investigator replied, her voice firm. You'll each have the opportunity to explain your side of the story. For now, we need you to remain here while we ask some questions. Mom turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Maya, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Tell them this isn't what it looks like. Tell them we didn't mean to. I met her gaze, my expression unwavering. You told me nobody needed my money, or me for that matter, I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. So I stopped giving you both. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. We were upset, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't mean you didn't have to take it so seriously. The words didn't come out as a shout. They were so quiet. I cut in, the memories now given voice, but the words hung in the air in the most powerful way. The words didn't come out as a shout. They came out level, held up by every drained account, every coerced payment, every moment of silent suffering. Sarah lurched forward, her face contorted with rage. You're gonna let them ruin our lives? She screamed, her voice shrill with panic. I didn't ruin anything, I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. I just stopped hiding what you did. The investigators began their questioning, methodically going through dates, amounts, and authorizations, their voices cutting through the forced calm of the room like shards of ice. Sarah stumbled over her answers, casting desperate glances at Mom and Dad for guidance. Seth scoffed once, then fell silent when specific totals were read aloud, his bravado evaporating under the weight of the evidence. Every favor, every act of so-called generosity, shrank under the harsh light of the numbers, exposing the ugly truth of their systematic exploitation. I didn't stay for the entire interrogation. I had no interest in watching them squirm, in witnessing their desperate attempts to justify their actions. As I picked up my bag, preparing to leave, Dad snapped, his voice laced with a familiar blend of anger and desperation. "If you walk out that door, Maya," he said, his eyes blazing, "don't bother coming back. You're dead to me." For years, that sentence had been a loaded gun pointed directly at my chest, a threat that had held me captive in their web of obligation. This time, it just sounded tired, hollow, devoid of any real power. I looked at him, at the man who had taught me that family was everything, as long as I kept paying for it. "I left a long time ago," I said, my voice calm and resolute. "You're just noticing it now." Then I turned and stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me, leaving the investigators and my family on the other side with the only thing that had ever truly belonged to them: the consequences of their actions. I drove away without looking back, but the fallout from that fateful day found its way to me anyway, an inevitable consequence of severing such deeply ingrained ties. 3 days later, Sarah's number flashed across my screen, her calls relentless, one after another until they finally stopped, replaced by a text message from an unknown number. It was Seth, his message dripping with desperation and barely concealed rage. "They froze my accounts," it read. "I might get suspended from work. Fix this, Maya, now." I didn't reply, refusing to be drawn back into their drama. A week after that, Mom sent a long, rambling email, layered with guilt, half apologies, and thinly veiled threats. "We didn't understand how serious this was," she wrote, her words dripping with insincerity. "Your father is devastated. Please talk to us, Maya. We're still your family." The same man who had declared that nobody needed me was now begging for a conversation, desperate to repair the damage he had inflicted. Funny how quickly the roles reverse when the money stops flowing. Dad never reached out directly, his pride apparently too wounded to allow him to grovel. But Jen, my former colleague, did, sending me a short, cryptic message that spoke volumes. "They're panicking," she wrote. "You did the right thing, Maya. Don't doubt yourself." Kelly, another friend from work, sent a longer, more heartfelt message, thanking me for finally exposing what she had witnessed for years, the subtle but undeniable signs of manipulation and exploitation. "You were brave enough for all of us," she wrote, her words a balm to my wounded soul. And somewhere between their unraveling and my quiet days of solitude, something profound shifted within me. I found a small, affordable apartment 2 states away, close to my new job, close to the elusive promise of peace. No more tense dinners, no more sudden emergencies, no more guilt disguised as love. For the first time in my life, the silence around me didn't feel like an absence, but like a precious, hard-won freedom. Some nights, I sit by my window with the lamp on low, watching the city move and breathe without me, a silent observer in a world that is finally, unequivocally, my own. I think about that dinner, the words that were meant to break me, and how they ended up setting me free instead. I used to believe that family loyalty meant unwavering endurance, absorbing every blow, filling every gap, paying every debt, no matter the cost to my own well-being. But I've learned, through bitter experience, that love without respect isn't loyalty. It's captivity, a gilded cage that slowly suffocates the soul. Walking away wasn't an act of punishment. It was an act of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to reclaim my own life. It was clarity, the shedding of illusions, the courageous decision to prioritize my own well-being above the demands of those who sought to exploit me. And so, the same silence they once mocked and weaponized became the protective boundary that ultimately saved me. If any part of my story feels familiar, if you've ever been used, dismissed, or told that you were too sensitive, please know that you aren't alone. You deserve reciprocity, not extraction. You deserve to be seen, not spent. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can provide. Share your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your stories matter. And if you want more stories like this, tales of resilience, self-discovery, and the triumph of the human spirit, hit subscribe so you won't miss what comes next.